Right, good evening. Thank you all for coming. We're obviously delighted to be here at Wembley. It's very exciting for us at Blizzard to be in such a historic place, the great home of English football. And we're very grateful to Club Wembley for having us and for hopefully what will be a very long and fruitful relationship with them. I'll keep this short. Our panel tonight, our introductions, we got Philippe Auclair, who's France Football's correspondent in London, the author of an award-winning biography of Eric Cantona, and his book on Thierry Henry will be coming out later this year. Gabriele Marcotti, who is the world football correspondent of The Times. He's the biographer of Fabio Capello, the autobiographer, or wrote the autobiography with Paolo Di Canio, and wrote The Italian Job, which is another excellent book. And our host tonight, Dave Farrar, who you'll know as a commentator from ESPN, and his book has just come out, The Perfect Punter. I just finished it at the weekend. It is absolutely brilliant, so buy that. Thank you.
So here's what we're going to do tonight. Very, very good evening, and thanks so much for coming. We are going to have questions from the floor and a couple of sections in this hour, so I can't get to everyone, but I'll do my best to get to as many people as possible. And if you've got something you desperately want to ask, there's always Twitter, and there's always, hopefully, the next event as well. But we're just going to start with a quick one for the panel. We're going to have a little bit of a debate about tactics later on as well, which I'm looking forward to. But we are going to start with a quick one, which is memories, really, of this place. Of course, some pretty new memories here, but also of the old Wembley as well. So I think, Gabriele, first of all, memories of either Wembley, if you like.
Well, I have a memory of the new Wembley. In fact, I think it was the first professional game that was staged here. But I don't want to mention it because somebody else we were chatting beforehand, says that they want to bring it up. So I won't mention somebody's hat trick. But instead, I'll mention something non-football related. That back I was a kid many years ago, and I'll mention Live Aid, which has nothing to do with football, nothing to do with sport, obviously. But I just still remember, especially when Queen were up there, they were doing their sort of Radio Gaga thing. And I don't know, I'm dating myself terribly here, but just seeing this sort of ocean of humanity in one place, and somebody pointing out to me that, the population of, if Wembley were a city, it would be like the 20th biggest city in the UK or something like that. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. This is a very big place.
Well, that's the sort of insight that you all came for. Live Aid. Hear it here first. Live Aid was not a sports event. That's exactly why we've all come here. Thanks for that, Gabe. Now, Philippe, you've been kind of led that way, haven't you? It's all about Gianpaolo Pazzini for you, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, if we talk about games that I've actually been at, and as games which give an identity to a stadium, one of the biggest problems when you build a new arena is, of course, to have football played in it that will make people belong there. And what was so special about that very first game that Gab referred to, and I'm sorry for having stolen your fire there, was that it felt, I remember very well, coming out of Wembley Park, Tube Station, and the atmosphere. The fans were there from England and Italy. It was just an under-21s game. It was a full house at the time because not all of the stadium was yet open, so it was 55,000, I think, was the official figure. And it felt like, yes, we were really coming home to a proper football stadium. And the game itself was probably the most exciting I've seen at Wembley as well. So there was Gianpaolo Pazzini, of course, the hat trick. And just the script of the whole game made you feel actually, this was a big gamble to demolish this stadium and build another one. And within 90 minutes, you felt, well, maybe it's a gamble that's already paying off.
Yeah, it was certainly great. My memory, by the way, for what it's worth, of the old Wembley was, I'm a big Reading fan, was losing in the playoff final against Bolton when, not still stuck about it, Jason McAteer should have been sent off when we were 2-0 up, and we missed a penalty at 2-0 up, but, not that it still bothers me. But, of course, the memory of the new one as well is us losing in a playoff final. But the glorious memory last year was when we pulled it back with 3-0 down at half-time, pulled it back to 3-2. It was that little moment of hope, and then we hit the post, and then it was all over. I suspect your memory of Wembley, old and new, will be to do with the playoff final as well, Jonathan.
Yeah, definitely. Playoff final in '98. Sunderland 4, Charlton 4. And we got beaten 7-6 on penalties. What I remember about that was sitting next to my dad, and me and my dad, when we were watching football together, never spoke to each other. We didn't really need to speak. And anybody who knew him would say that he wasn't a particularly talkative man anyway. But I remember, I think when they went to 3-3, which was Richard Rufus getting his first goal for Charlton in something like his 350th game for them, Lionel Perez coming out for a corner and missing it. And I remember thinking, even at that moment, yeah, I think we're going to lose this, but what an occasion to have been at. This is a game that actually goes beyond fandom. It actually is just a great game, you know, to experience, and actually it's a privilege to be here for this. And then when it went to penalties, it was a very hot day, and I don't know if this was a thing with the shape of the old Wembley, or if it was just that day, but the air just seemed to sit in the stadium. There seemed to be no oxygen in the air anymore. And I remember somebody fainting kind of 5 or 6 yards to my left. And I remember, you know, this real kind of band around my chest, this headache, and this awful knowledge that there's absolutely not a chance we're going to win this. And then, you know, while in this very fatalistic mood, also being furious with Danny Dichio, who was a centre forward, who didn't take a penalty. 7 penalties, he doesn't take one, he's a centre forward. And of course, the next season, we played Oxford, 2-0 up inside 6 minutes, get a penalty. Danny Dichio, yeah, I'll have this one, thanks. So yeah, my memory of the old Wembley is what a coward Danny Dichio was.
You're watching Therapy Hour here at Club Wembley. I think it's time we got some questions from the floor. We have got 2 roving people, very tall so I can see them, with microphones. So if you just have a teeny bit of patience. But hands up, please. Any questions from the floor? I'm going to pick the one furthest away from them so they have to run. Gentleman down here at the front, please. You just bear with me and wait for the microphone to come. And what's your question for the panel then?
I wanted to ask, are we getting closer finally to having European League setups in particular to help out the clubs in the smaller countries who, let's be honest, are pulling far and farther back from the richer, bigger clubs? I mean, you can see some clubs are already becoming bankrupt because they're trying to keep up, like thankfully Rangers, and then they probably won't be the last.
So European League setups, Gabe, you first of all.
Well, it's funny you should mention, because I think today there's a UEFA Congress. And one of the issues that they're looking at, and this has kind of gone under the radar, I think safe to let the cat out of the bag. So in women's football, in the Women's Champions League, the Belgian and Dutch Women's League, they play together, and UEFA are going to vote on whether to allow them entry into the Champions League. This is pretty important because what it does is it kind of backdoors an important precedent, which is the idea that UEFA can recognize the right of smaller countries to band together to form a national league. And obviously, if you're a fan of a Dutch or Belgian or Scottish, indeed, Portuguese club, you know, this issue's come up. We've heard of the Atlantic League. There was a proposal for Scandinavian League. Personally, I think it's necessary, and I think above all, it's fair. Clubs like Porto, Ajax, Benfica, Celtic, Rangers, you know, the Anderlecht, the list goes on and on. These are great clubs with huge fan bases, and the gap between them and the countries in the big 5 European leagues is only going to increase, basically because of an accident of geography. They have the backing of the European Union, obviously. It doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow or in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, but certainly I think there's a lot of people who are lobbying for it. And there's a lot of people, I think, within UEFA who are open to the idea, especially if it's going to work, obviously, against the backdrop of financial fair play.
Philippe, you come from a country that just about has a major European league.
Well, thank you. We're beneath Portugal now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, at the moment, as we stand, the last French club qualified for the Champions League will have to play another qualification round. So, I don't know. I was just thinking, actually, does France qualify, Gab, when you talk about the smaller countries? Because if you're talking about financial power, if you look at the way French clubs are run, which is supposedly well, but if you look at the budgets and the turnovers, we very much belong to the lower leagues of European football, with the exception of Paris Saint-Germain. The other thing is that if you think about this European League, are you thinking about a European League with the big guys and another European League for the smaller guys? What exactly are you thinking of? Because, yes, because, for example, today, as well at the UEFA Congress, a deal was struck between UEFA and the big European clubs by which the European clubs will get 100 million euros, if I'm not mistaken, which will be taken from the money made from the euro, and it will go to 150 million euros in 2016, which is basically a means for Michel Platini and UEFA, that's my opinion, to buy Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and to stamp on that threat of having a breakaway league, which is always the thing that they have. Gab disagrees with me. He would, wouldn't he? So when you talk about that as well, I'm thinking, and I'm throwing questions as well as answering them, I'm also thinking, in which state is the Spanish league going to be in 2 years' time, for example? Supposedly one of the richest leagues. If you look a little bit more closely, certainly the situation of many clubs there is really perilous. And you're thinking that this order that we have at the moment, it is a financial order as much as anything else, and it could change very, very quickly indeed.
Thanks very much, Philippe. John, have you got anything pressing to say? Because I want to get as many people as we can.
Well,
so quick answer.
I think what is interesting with this is where we have already tried this out, which is with Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They have their own domestic leagues, but they also have a Baltic competition. And they take, I think I'm right in saying, they take the best 4 teams from each 3 leagues, and they have the 12 teams in 4 groups of 3. And I'm not even sure this competition is still running. It was running about 4 or 5 years ago, and the problem was nobody went to watch it. So even though the standard was clearly higher than the domestic leagues, people didn't care. And that, I think, is the danger.
Yeah, but, sorry if I jump in here, but that's what they did with Scandinavia, the Royal League. The idea here is that you would have a promotion relegation system, and then it's not like they'd be playing league football and then in their spare time going and playing these matches against each other the way they did in the Baltic League or the Royal League. The idea is this would become the regional competition for the top teams. And the idea of also creating these regional championships is also obviously to stave off the threat of a European Super League as well.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this does work in basketball. You have the Adriatic League, where you have the countries of former Yugoslavia in Italy, and that's very successful. Now, of course, there's political issues there, and football, I guess, brings out more people and greater passions than basketball, so there's a security threat. But it seems to work very well in basketball, so perhaps...
Actually, in basketball, it's something else, that you still have the domestic championship.
And that's alongside it, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we're veering onto basketball, so I'm gonna move it on. I know a lot of people have got questions. This time, actually, when you put your hand over a question, would you mind leaving it up once I pick someone else so I can see where I'm going next? Sorry, I should have said that. So the gentleman there, yeah, over there. I'll come over this side in a second, guys. The gentleman there. Make it a good one.
Yeah, convenient.
No pressure.
It comes onto the point that Philippe was just saying. To what extent do you think the financial superiority of the Premier League has contributed to England's demise? And by that I mean, you were talking about how a lot of Spanish teams, for example, don't have shirt sponsors and don't have financial money. And the emphasis, like if you look at Athletic Bilbao and to an extent Villarreal, they have to depend on their youth system to create the players. So now we have an abundance of all these young players because the teams can't afford to buy players, where Premier Leagues will just depend, they'll buy a 20-year-old sensation who's already made, and the downside of that is you only have, for example, Wilshere in England, who's probably a world-class up-and-coming talent. So, in essence, to what extent do you think the Premier League is attributable to England's demise?
Gabe, you're a man who likes talking about England's demise. So, is it Iker Muniain's fault, England's demise, then, in the wider issue?
No, I mean, I'm not so doom and gloom. I think when we talk about England and the performance of the national team, and we use that as a benchmark of how good a nation is doing, I think we're way off base. Because if you use the World Cup or the Euros as a benchmark, you're talking about a very limited number of games. You're talking about a situation where a lot of things can go wrong. I don't think it really measures the health of anything. I think that the supremacy of the Premier League, it certainly has its pros and cons, I think, from a fan's perspective, but I think by and large for the clubs, it's been positive. They could invest more and better in youth academies. Now, it's more competitive to emerge, perhaps, and there are other wrinkles with it. It's not a perfect system. But in the case of those clubs you mentioned, I mean, Villarreal is a club which, strictly speaking, if you look at revenue and size of club and who, quote unquote, for historical reasons should be in the Premier League and be self-sustaining, they don't belong in the top flight. This is a small club. They were bankrolled by the Roig family, who tried to make them self-sustaining by investing in youth and so on. That's kind of been where they are, and now that they've pulled the plug on the money, they'll probably go down. You can make an argument there are clubs in the Premier League like Bolton and Wigan who are in that same situation. These are not clubs who really should be Premier League. They've gambled, they've failed. I don't think it's that bad for a nation and for its and for the production of young players if clubs go up and down personally. I think what matters is that the resources are there and the infrastructure is there for players to come through. If they have to go elsewhere to make it, perhaps in other countries, and there are examples who've done that. I mean, Derbyshire's gone to, obviously went to Greece and then came back. I'm blanking on the goalkeeper at Bursaspor, Carson as well. So there have been examples, and there might be others who choose to do that and come back as better players.
Actually, guys, I do want to move it on, because if we all answer every single question, we're going to have
like make a very quick point.
Very quick, Philippe.
The fact
and you're not good at very quick, so very quick.
Very quick. The fact that you have a football that is rich or that is poor doesn't mean necessarily that the youth formation is going to be related to that. Take the examples of Portugal, which has got probably the highest proportion of South American players and assimilated players in Europe. Take the example of Turkish football, which has got the lowest number of players under the age of 21 playing in the Super League. And these are not extraordinarily rich leagues. And in Turkey, I'm talking about clubs, not the five big ones, but there is no direct correlation, I believe, between the two.
Like lightning, brilliantly done, like lightning.
Dave, this really will be quick.
Okay.
I think there's 3 ways you measure...
I guess he edits the thing.
There's 3 ways, yeah, you're fired. There's 3 ways you can measure the strength of a league, or the strength of the nation's football. There's the national team, there's the competitiveness of its top division, and there's performances in continental competition. Now, to score highly in all 3 of those, I think is almost impossible, and I'd suggest that probably only Brazil in the world does score highly in all 3. Now, that partly is because in South America the standard is not as high as in Europe. It's partly because it's such a vast nation, and it's partly because their national league is still very young, and so there hasn't been time for money to concentrate at a handful of clubs. So I look at England and I see 4 or 5 teams who can win the league, which is not the case in Spain or pretty much anywhere else in Europe. I see a national team that is ranked 5th in the world and regularly gets to the quarterfinals of major tournaments, and I see that they have one team in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, but have regularly, in the last 5 years, had multiple teams in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and that suggests to me English football is actually quite healthy. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you. Yeah, it's time for this side of the room. Who had a question over here? There was someone over there. I'm sure there was. I'm sure I saw a hand up. Hand's gone back down. So anyone over here? Any more questions? Really difficult one, mate. The guy at the back there, so you can slalom through. We've got to have a Twitter question in a moment as well, because we're all high-tech, obviously. So the gentleman there, yeah.
Okay, I've got a question about Belgium.
Brilliant.
Obviously
A question about Belgium, everyone. Round of applause.
Obviously, there's a vast array of young, talented Belgian footballers coming through, players like Hazard and Mignolet, the keeper, Vertonghen. If this is Belgium's golden generation, given the sort of the problems in the country and given the fact that there's obviously these egos and they've been struggling in qualification recently, are they destined to never reach their potential and succeed at a major tournament?
Brilliant. You've got to ask the Frenchman, haven't you? Belgians...
Well, yes, because we live in the hope that there will be a secession between the Flanders and Wallonia, and then we can get all the Walloons with us, like Eden Hazard, and Marwan Fellaini, we could do with him as well.
And Lukaku, you'd have a chance, wouldn't you? So what do you think about... Thibaut Courtois as well. What do you think of the golden generation? Can they...
No.
No? Okay.
No, and I think precisely for the reason that you were alluding to is that the problem, there has been only one golden generation really in Belgian football, which was at the time when Raymond Goethals was in charge of the national team and doing miracles literally with this. He was a remarkable man-manager and a person who was born in Brussels and was half in the Flemish and half in the Walloon culture. It was a Bruxellois. And he managed to bring all these players together. And they did this, I mean, this was the generation of Vercouteren and so forth. They were magnificent. And since then, it's been far more difficult. And there is no such unifying figure, I think, today in Belgian football. And I can't see that wonderful, you're talking about Vermeulen as well. You're talking about so many players. I can't see it really happening.
Sorry, I've written about this a little bit, and I strongly disagree with Philippe, probably not for the first time this evening. I don't see how Romelu Lukaku really cares about Walloons, Flemish, and all these political issues. I think it might have been an issue in the 80s. I think the reason they haven't developed as quickly is A, they're still very young, and B, in certain positions, they're not really filled out yet. But, to judge them on a qualifying campaign when the best is yet to come for people like Axel Witsel, Steven Dufour. Remember, most of these guys many of these guys are second-generation people who've come from other parts of the world. I think they could care less about this age-old debates.
It's not to do with the players. It's got to do with the infrastructure of the Belgian Federation. The fact you've got to have a structure in place, and the structure at the moment is imploding. You have a country which basically has been running without a stable government for yonks, and it is reflected in all the administration. And to have a successful team, okay, you need great players.
You need to have a strong government.
You need a strong government as well.
Frenchman, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Exactly.
We won 4 World Cups with our government.
Yeah.
Including 2 of them with a very strong government.
I want to ask you, where does the... Nice, nice. Moving away from football, isn't it? Just a little bit. Jonathan, other golden generations, there's a very obvious one, of course, in Portugal, and England too, to a certain extent, that was much crowed about and talked about. Where do you think this current Belgian side, this young side, sort of ranks alongside them?
I think it's always very dangerous to label any generation a golden generation.
Of course it's dangerous.
Because you see, I mean, the examples you've listed, Ivory Coast are going through this as well. This perception that we should have won it. You know, in 2006, when Ivory Coast got to the Cup of Nations final, there was well, it's against Egypt, it's in Egypt, it's difficult. By 2008, the pressure was there of, hang on, how many more chances are we going to get? Which the answer is probably 4, but they've wasted 3 of those now. And you could see the pressure in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon this year on that Ivory Coast team, that they played the most, given the talent they had, they played astonishingly negative defensive football. They were set up, let's not make mistakes. And they didn't make mistakes. They didn't concede a goal in the whole tournament. And they waited for the opposition to give them set plays, to make mistakes, and that happened all the way through. It even happened in the final against Zambia. They got a penalty, 20 minutes from time, and Drogba missed. And then they had nothing else. They didn't have any creativity. I mean, that's another issue with Ivory Coast. They really lack a creator, and Gervinho, we thought would be that, I'm going off the point. We thought Gervinho would be that creative, he isn't.
So is the Belgian golden generation
I think it's very dangerous.
as good as the Portuguese
I mean,
or English?
I speak as somebody whose great-grandfather was a wool merchant in Antwerp.
Right, coming back onto it, guys. We'll get there.
Who I think took the very wise decision in the 1890s to move to Sunderland. And I mean, I think Gab's right that they're overloaded with midfielders and forwards. They don't necessarily have great defenders, Vermaelen being the exception. I think they're unbalanced side. I think they're a young side. And I think if they do have this sense of entitlement, which is only going to be enhanced by them by the individual players going to big clubs, then it's hard for them. And also, their UEFA coefficient doesn't help them. They were in a very tough group in qualifying for the Euros. They were with Germany and Turkey. I think they're in a group with Serbia, Croatia, Scotland, Wales. Is that right for the Euros?
So from memory, yeah.
So I mean that's a tough group. So you know, I think they're stacked against them.
So they're stacked against them at the moment.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But is this golden generation as good as? No.
Well, it's not as good as the Portuguese one because it didn't win anything.
Thank you, Gareth. We've got some tweets coming through, haven't we? So chuck one our way if you would.
Okay, this is from a question from Goalsoul, saying that if you could do a quantum leap a la Sam Beckett into any game in any time period, who, when, and where would you go and why?
Okay, so if everyone couldn't hear that, if you could do a quantum leap into any time period, presumably football related, where would you go? Who would you be and why? Gabriele, first of all.
Well, I'd be very tempted to say that I would want to be the Matrix, Marco Materazzi, just to get Zidane sent off. But I go for a more obvious one, Diego Maradona, to be able to rise up into the heavens, touch the face of God, and punch the ball past Peter Schöpfer. That's pretty special. And get away with it.
Okay, Philippe?
Well,
if he was Marco Materazzi, you'd be Zinedine Zidane, wouldn't you?
No, I think I would be Charlie George in that cup final.
Wow, okay. Mm-hmm. Just to have that feeling?
Yes, because I'm a gooner.
Okay.
No, but that's, honestly, I think, yes, I'm thinking in terms of one thing that we don't understand as journalists and what players keep telling us is that you don't understand what it is to score a great goal in a great competition on a great occasion. And actually, I was talking to Basil Boli about it 2 days ago, and he said, I can't describe it to you. I said, please describe it. I'm trying to interview you. No, I can't. But so I can only imagine what this rush must be, and I think for me, Charlie George would be perfect image of that.
We'll get Jonathan in a minute. Mine would be Luis Figo that night at the Camp Nou, just to know what it felt like to have that many people hate you.
Oh, you do, Dave, you do.
Thank you. I set them up, you finish them off, well done. But the night that contained, without question for me, the greatest football banner I've ever seen, which set up in one of the far corners of the stadium. I remember sitting there and it said, Figo, you would sell your mother for money if you knew who she was. It was sensational. Jonathan.
I think for me, the game is quite easy. I definitely go, as a Sunderland fan, I definitely go back to the 73 Cup final. The question is, which player? Now, if I was Ian Porterfield, I'd obviously then become an alcoholic who my career ended with a car crash. I'd become a born-again Christian, get cancer, manage Armenia. So that doesn't seem like a good thing. Montgomery, maybe. I mean, obviously, the save is, you get the rush, and that save is indelibly written in football history. But, to spring up from the ground like that, to turn, to push the shot into the bar. But I actually think, although, again, I really wouldn't want to turn into what he's turned into, but Mickey Horswell, who was this hard-tackling, ugly, really hard-working central midfielder who was brilliant that day. I mean, really incredible industry. And just to go about kicking that Leeds team and winning would be fantastic.
We're touching the heights, aren't we, tonight? Diego Maradona, Charlie George, Luis Figo, and Mickey Horswell. There you go. That's a pretty good cross-section. I had a question as well. We're going to take some more questions from the floor in a moment. Then, of course, many of you got the chance to go on the tour of the stadium, the half-hour tour, which should be fantastic. But I did want to ask you a question about tactics. You won't be surprised to hear, which is, I just wonder, I know Philippe has a strong opinion about this, but Jonathan, if you didn't know, wrote a wonderful book about tactics, the definitive book about football tactics called Inverting the Pyramid. I'm sure the nature of the audience, most of you know that. But did you spawn a monster? You think, in terms of the way that football is analysed these days, in terms of some of the stuff that you read, everything has to be tactics-based, almost journalistically, almost too much, I think. Do you think you spawned a monster?
In the sense, and this is going to sound terribly arrogant, in the sense that Alf Ramsey spawned a monster by winning the World Cup. In that, sorry, let me explain that.
Doesn't sound arrogant at all, Jonathan. No.
When you've been 999 days in the bestsellers charts, come back to me then. Let's try and get myself out of this hole. After Alf Ramsey won the World Cup, he then was a whole load of imitators who played a very negative version of the 4-4-2 that Ramsey played, and who perhaps didn't quite grasp everything he was doing. And the result was English football became very stuck in its ways, very stuck in the basic 4-4-2 we think of. And I think equally, I think there was a tactical wave coming anyway, and I was just lucky to be the one who rode it. And that wave of tactical thinking has then led to a whole number of other blogs, a whole number of other journalists writing about tactics. And that generally, I think, is a very positive thing. I think it's something that English football culture was really lacking. And some of these blogs Michael Cox's Zonal Marking is absolutely brilliant. And there's one on Ross County's tactics, which is fantastic and very obscure, but it's brilliant. So some of it is great, but I do get a little bit irritated with people who only see tactics, because what I've always said and what I think is very important is tactics are one aspect, and I think everything is interrelated. So let's take the example of Uruguay at the Copa America last year, or Zambia at the Cup of Nations this year. And I think there's a clear comparison between them, that both had a very, very strong coach who had, although there's, 21 years between Oscar Washington Tabarez and Hervé Renard, they both have a sort of a fatherly relationship with their squad. And that means both that they're very tough, and you saw Hervé Renard punching Davis and Nkausa, the right back, literally punching him during the first half because he was playing too high of a pitch, and there was a danger of Gervinho getting in behind him. And then at the end of the game, he picks up the left back, the injured player, whose name escapes me, and carried him onto the pitch. He was injured, carried him onto the pitch to join the celebration. So you get both sides of that father-son relationship. The laying down the law, but also being very caring. And Tabarez, I think, has exactly the same. With 3 minutes to go of the final, he brought on Godin, was it?
I think it was, yeah.
Or was it Fusilli? I can't remember.
I wasn't doing the game.
It was Godin, to make sure that every outfielder in his squad, and Godin had been injured, unless it was Fusilli, I can't remember which one it was, make sure every outfielder had played at least a minute in the tournament. Now, he had no need to do that, but he did that to make everybody feel included. So if they didn't have the respect of their players, if they didn't have, I don't think it's too strong to say the love of their players, they wouldn't be able to impose tactical systems they want to. They wouldn't be able to click their fingers and say, okay, we're going to back three, we're going to back four, you play higher, you play deeper. And the players just instinctively react because They believe in the coach, and they're prepared, because of a team spirit that that coach has generated, to sacrifice themselves, not to do the glamorous stuff, to do the difficult stuff, because they believe in the cause. So you need the two things going hand in hand.
So, you know, motivation, for want of a better word, is every bit as important as tactics.
Of course
or at
it
least
is.
Can be, yeah.
Of course it is. And physical preparation and you know, all the other aspects, everything goes together.
Yeah.
I just think that historically, English football has overlooked the tactical, and now possibly we're in danger of...
Overcompensating.
Exactly.
Philippe, do you think it's overcompensated a bit? I think what we're talking about, I mean, a lot of you, of course, read the news media and stuff like that. And now when you, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but a lot of times when you read a report or you read a preview of a game, it always seems to be instantly tactical based, ahead of anything else, ahead of even injury news sometimes, you know, when a big player's out of the game or whatever. It's just
one of the things that I find the most frustrating is, as somebody who writes about football and loves reading about football, is that it has this obsession with tactics, which Jonathan is partly responsible for, has spawned a new form of writing, which I find, I mean, I just can't get used to it. For one simple reason is that being somebody who can analyze on the hoof a game as it's going past, and you would know that as being commentator, is one of the hardest skills to get, and it takes years and years and years. It takes very special brain, I would say. I'm amazed when I hear Michael Cox analyzing a game literally 5 minutes after the final whistle, and coming up, but with always perfectly pertinent points. And I'm thinking, well, I was there surrounded in the press box by about 60 guys who are desperately trying not to say the wrong thing in terms of their tactical analysis of the game. And I'm thinking, your writing is impaired, you're not sharing the thing you should be sharing first of all, which is the emotional content of the game. Of course, if you've noticed something, how often, I want to ask you guys, how often in the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game you see the people in the press room going, are they playing 4-2-1-3? Are they playing 4-1-4-1? And then they change their mind and they change their copy because nobody's quite sure, because it doesn't, football is fluid. And you can, of course, explain a number of things and throw that, but you cannot organize chaos.
Okay, Gabriele, what's your thought? I'm quite interested to get your thoughts, particularly on the motivation v tactics debate, because I know you've expressed some strong opinions about that in the past on 5 Live, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I obviously every nation has their own cultural legacy for football and the way they report it, and so I come from a country where maybe we've overanalyzed tactics for many years. Maybe we're a whole nation of junior Jonathan Wilsons. I don't know. So I actually kind of feel that in this country, when more people are writing about tactics, they're just kind of evening it out to normality, to the way it should be, because it is an important aspect of the game. It's obviously not the only aspect of the game. On the part, though, of your question, I agree. You can have the most brilliant tactician in the world, which Andre Villas-Boas perhaps may well be. But you have to be able, there's 2 elements, I think. Obviously, you have to have a tactical system which fits the players who are there. And secondly, you have to be able to get your message across to them in a way that they understand and that they can then execute. I remember David Platt telling me that when he was at Nottingham Forest, he, and obviously he played in Italy and he had all these grand ideas and he talked to Glenn Hoddle and we're going to do this and that. And he goes in and he starts, he's at the chalkboard giving his sort of tactical, very detailed tactical lessons or tactical game plans to his players. And, after about 10 minutes, 3 guys are asleep, 1 guy's farting, another guy's picking his nose, and the other ones all have their eyes glazed over. They're not used to it. So you have to be able to relate it across. That's what the great managers do. They get you to buy into their system, and they get it for you, and they relay it to you in a way that you can understand and digest.
There's a famous story as well of, which I'm sure many of you know, about Bobby Robson, God rest his soul, when he was at Ipswich, and Russell Osman, who I used to work with a lot at Eurosport, told me this, and he told me it's true. I always thought it was an urban myth, but famously, I'm sure I'm telling a story many of you know, that he stood in front of the chalkboard and wrote out the tactical system and did it for 20 minutes and said, any questions? And someone, I think it was a left back, put his hand, Mick Mills, I think it was, put his hand and went, yeah, there's one thing, Gaffer, there's 12 players. And no one had noticed, and that was the tactical team. So it's one of my favourite tactic stories. But Philippe,
yeah, just a point. I think to go exactly in the same direction. I think as Gab and Jonathan have gone, is the fact probably the most successful manager in the Premier League at the moment is somebody who epitomizes this understanding of tactics and motivation with Brendan Rodgers at Swansea. when you listen to Brendan Rodgers, the Gab is frowning.
I thought you were going to say Sir Alex.
I did too.
No. I mean, mutatis mutandi, all things.
Brendan.
No, at the moment, if you look at the means at his disposal, the way that is balancing tactical approach, Alex Ferguson actually relies a lot on the work of other people. Brendan Rodgers describes himself as a coach first and foremost, who is also becoming a manager. And that he's capable to have a British squad of players buying into a tactical system. But he does that also because of his quite extraordinary rapport, obviously, that he has with the players. So they go both hand in hand.
They do their jobs, don't they? They do every answer to their jobs for him. I'm going to take a couple more questions from the floor. And yeah, the gentleman here down at the front. So I wasn't ignoring you. I was just looking if there was someone at the back. Go on.
When my father was my age, he was about to enter the greatest 5 years of his football spectating life, watching Everton in the mid-80s. Now I'm his age. I don't think that's going to happen. But if...
I think you might be right, yeah.
Well, not exactly, because if Bill Kenwright does as he says he's going to and sells out to our version of Abramovich or Sheikh Mansour, it could happen. But am I right in thinking that actually I don't want it? I would rather Everton stay where they were with Kenwright than have the greatest 5 years of my life, because what that lot looked like and the Champions League looked like, I don't want to be part of it.
Wow.
Is that right?
Is that right? Well, the man whose team's about to be knocked out of the FA Cup by Everton should have the first point, Jonathan.
No, I think it is an interesting point. I mean, having grown up a Sunderland fan, it seems logical to me that you wait to win a trophy, hopefully once in my lifetime. And I'm quite glad. For a long time in my life, I sort of thought, I wish I'd been 7 or 8 years older so I could have experienced winning in '73. But actually, it would have been awful. To have that too early, and then what else have you got to look forward to? And I was talking to a Forest fan about this recently. He said that when he was in his mid-teens, he won the league, he won the European Cup twice. He thought, brilliant. And everything else has been anticlimax. And that must be a terrible thing. So I actually, part of me thinks, well, I mean, obviously I want to win the FA Cup this year. And an FA Cup quarter-final replay 20 years after the great FA Cup quarter-final replay against Chelsea seems like a good occasion to have another one of those great nights. But actually, maybe when I'm about 65, 70, I mean, I want to be able to appreciate it. I want to be able to go and get really, really drunk afterwards with enough mates who are still around. But the anticlimax on the other side. But you're right. I think when your default setting is winning, it does create a horribly paranoid, negative mindset. And I'd hate to be going into every game thinking, oh, we've got to win this. What if we don't win this? What are we going to do? If we only draw, I mean, Manchester City last night, Manchester City's record this season is extraordinary. They've only lost two of the last 10 games. And yet, this is a terrible crisis. And so 12 minutes ago last night, they're thinking, the league's over, which in modern football, I guess it would have been. And that pressure must be awful. Whereas with Sunderland, it's always quite a nice bonus when you win a game. If you get a point, it's quite a nice bonus.
Philippe, it's opportune to ask you as well, because your country has almost the ultimate be careful what you wish for club, maybe in Paris Saint-Germain. Are they going to enjoy being fans as much in 3 years' time as they have done for the last 10, do you think?
I think they will have to learn to enjoy hatred, because they were already a very unpopular club in France. And as from now, everybody from everywhere wants them to lose all the time. Does that answer your question? Yeah, because...
you had a light in your eyes there. I was quite scared.
Yeah, it's quite scary, I know. Sorry. And this is... I'm going to get death threats from PSG fans after that. But it's a fact that it has changed, certainly, the look that people have on PSG. But I was going to say, as an Arsenal fan, you're talking about the attitude of many of my fellow fans of Arsenal here. Now, the difference is that I became an Arsenal fan in 1979 and went through some of the most awful football you could imagine, when actually your lot was very good. And that, for me, is totally indissociable. And what's happened at Arsenal over the past 8 or 9 months in particular has shown that I think you're unfortunately right.
I'll forever call those your PSG eyes, forever. I'm going to remember that stare. Spooky, it really was. Gabe, what about you?
Well, I think first of all, if with financial fair play coming in, this idea of the wealthy sheikh coming in to fix everything, I think that's going to go out the window because you simply can't do it. Clubs have to break even. What we will get is big clubs will stay big because they can spend more, and small clubs or smaller clubs will stay small. Theoretically, yeah, you can grow revenue over time, but that'll take ages. I think realistically, if you're a fan of a club, what brought you to be a fan of a club for whatever reasons, and it could be personal, it could be different for everybody, that should stay. I mean, the idea is you follow your club, whether it's Ross County or Manchester United. Now, in your case, perhaps, as I said, you had kind of this misfortune of thinking it was going to be like this forever for Everton. But obviously time changes, and the reality is in the modern world, you need a big fan base, you need a big catchment area, helps you have a wealthy city, wealthy sponsors, and you know, the harsh reality is you're in Liverpool, you've got the Irish Sea on two sides, you've got the world on the other, you've got Manchester United, Manchester City down the road, and
We noticed.
yeah, and I haven't even mentioned those guys in red. So, you know, the reality is, be a fan this way and enjoy it if you can, and if not, you know, jump on another bandwagon, but I don't think you're going to do that.
Are there any questions from this side? Oh, brilliant, there are. Okay, gentleman right over in the corner, and I'll come to you in a sec. Wait for the mic.
Just looking forward to the next World Cup. There's been a lot of, obviously, they didn't have to really bid for the process the same way that sort of England or Russia or Qatar did. And with Textera also stepping down and them not really even understanding the host cities, do you think the next World Cup in Brazil is really destined to fail and be a disappointment, or do you think they'll inevitably turn it around as they always seem to do?
There you go, Jonathan. Is it going to be a failure, Brazil 2014?
I fear it will be, yeah. I mean, I was in Brazil last week, and a very good friend of mine who's a journalist was saying that he actually wishes that FIFA would step in and say, take it away, because he's appalled by how much money has been lost in corruption. That the reason, and you have to question FIFA's motives in awarding the World Cups to Russia and Qatar, countries without an existing football infrastructure. Why do they want that? Why do they want billions of pounds being invested in stadiums and in infrastructure? Because basically, the more money you have, the more money is there for kickbacks. And I think that it's pretty clear that's going on in Brazil. You look at where the stadiums are in Brazil, and I mean, having a stadium in Manaus is insane. I mean, there's just no football culture there at all. That stadium will be empty for all time after 2014. It's a nonsensical waste of money. In the same way, South Africa, I mean, okay, they've got the Cup of Nations in January next year, but those stadiums in Nelspruit, in Polokwane, in Port Elizabeth, when are they going to be full? When are they going to be used? I was in Angola for the Cup of Nations 2 years ago. The big stadium in Angola, in Luanda, in the capital, has been used twice since the tournament. The stadiums in Lubango, in Cabinda, in Benguela have not been used once. You have a 45,000 capacity stadium in Benguela that has not been used since the end of the Cup of Nations. Now, who benefits from that? Not the local populace, not football in Angola. Nobody benefits apart from the Chinese construction workers and the Chinese firms who built the stadium, and presumably the football officials who have lined their own pockets by giving them the contracts.
Maybe some politicians too.
Oh, and then
planning permission people.
All the people with their fingers in the pot.
What about you? You looking forward to it, or do you think it's going to be horrific? What do you think?
I mean, it's all just doom and gloom in South Africa as well. In terms of the experience, somebody who loves football and a journalist covering it, and the fans, I thought South Africa was great, and it was all this doom and gloom. Germany, of course, was even better, and it hurts me to say it because they are Germans, but maybe they'll do it a bit differently because Italy did win it. So I don't know, but I think it is a point. I think we need to rethink, because right now, this one country, one World Cup situation, and let's go and let's build this infrastructure out of nothing. It occurred to me, there's maybe only 20, 25 countries in the world who can host a World Cup. You know, if you're Ireland, if you're Slovenia, if you're Bolivia, you know, if you're Uruguay at this stage, hey, sorry, screw you. I don't care what you gave to the game, but you'll never get a World Cup. So what I'd like to see is better use of existing stadiums, World Cups perhaps shared out. There's no reason they couldn't have played some games in Mozambique perhaps Namibia, some of the neighboring nations, and a bit more common sense rather than sort of these massive spending projects.
Philippe?
When it comes to Brazil, it's actually a question that I have for Jonathan, because what I've been told as well, one of the big problems they've got is that the government there is actually not very happy to walk hand in hand with the people organizing the World Cup, and there's great resistance at the top echelon of the government to go with that. And I don't know if you should be off the record or not, but I was recently with a friend of mine who's worked closely with FIFA.
He's about to tell us a secret.
Well, it's not really a secret. It's about Mr. Teixeira. I don't think anything about Mr. Teixeira will come as a surprise, but this friend of mine saw contracts which had been passed between FIFA and the organizing committee, and of course, who was the signatory on both contracts? Mr. Teixeira.
It's more efficient that way.
Yeah, that's one way of describing it. But I think that there are people even in Brazil who are saying this cannot and shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, and I guess this touches your point about can you spread it out, can you have it in more than one country? And there's absolutely no reason why not. Because South Africa is so big, Brazil is so big, Russia is so big, that you have to fly between venues anyway. So why does it matter if you fly from, say, Buenos Aires to Montevideo, or get the ferry from Buenos Aires to Montevideo, rather than flying from Rio to Manaus, or Recife?
Why tell 170 FIFA members in the world, you will never, ever get to, you can buy the rights of the World Cup, you might even get to play there, but you will never, ever get to sample part of it, to host even a small sliver of it.
And I think that the one positive from Qatar is that, and it is the one positive, is that it's so small that actually getting between venues will be easy. You won't need to take flights. You won't have that logistical nightmare.
Great, good for journalists then. Fantastic.
And fans.
Yeah, sure. I know what you mean. Gentleman down here.
Gabriele, a few minutes ago, you seemed fairly certain that financial fair play is going to work. I wondered if the other panelists shared your faith.
Do you share his faith about financial fair play? Make your case, first of all.
Well, first of all, I don't know what you mean by work. I mean, it's going to be, it's going to...
Aims will be realised.
Well, its aims will be realised in the sense that, I mean, I have my own views on financial fair play. I don't think it's good for football overall. I think they could have done a better job. What will happen, though, is that big clubs will necessarily start making money. I think costs are going to go down, and that's why, incidentally, that's why the big clubs are all in favor of it. So in that sense, it's going to work. Now, there's a whole series. There's going to be legal challenges. There's a lot of issues with, what sort of punishments UEFA are going to apply. Will it be financial initially? I'm sure it will be. I've suggested that we're going to have a bit of a luxury tax situation at first for some of the clubs. UEFA keep insisting that, yeah, it might be like that at first, but over time, we will not allow this continuous overspending. We're going to see. I mean, I think ultimately, the people who invest in the clubs, even the Abramoviches and Mansours, after they get that initial thrill, they probably want to make money or come close to breaking even as well.
Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody has a clue exactly how it's going to be implemented. My other big concern about it is, and we've seen this with Rangers in Scotland, that suddenly HMRC have said, you're not going to go away with it anymore. They must have known this debt was mounting, and they've suddenly called it in. Now, if they start going after English clubs as well, I think English clubs have been largely remiss in paying their tax. Certainly Spanish clubs have. I think £850 million.
752.
752 million pounds. Maybe 850 million euros is the figure. Are owed by Spanish clubs to the Spanish taxman. Now, if the British taxman's chasing that money and the Spanish taxman isn't, well, that's just not fair. And that's a big problem. And I think you'll find other examples of inconsistencies and incongruities in how different countries apply aspects of finance.
And I think when it comes to financial fair play, again, we don't know exactly what will be in this financial fair play. We still don't know. And one thing...
What don't you know? I don't want to sound like a UEFA spokesman here, but I get a little bit tired. The media comes, well, we don't know. They're not going to do anything. UEFA and FIFA are useless. What don't you know?
Well, exactly what you said, Gab. We don't know exactly what the punishment is going to be for the clubs who wouldn't toe the line. We don't know if it's going to be points deduction. We don't know if it's going to be financial deduction. We don't know how this is going to be applied. This is pretty important. We're talking about implementation here.
No, but I mean, they've said it's going to be a warning letter, followed by withholding of Champions League prize money, or a fine, followed by exclusion.
Well, that's in theory, and that's maybe what they're telling you that's what's going to happen. As you said yourself, legal challenges, and again, we are not there in the implementation phase. One thing when we talk about financial fair play, what about the very structure of the European game? And the fact that maybe is the most unfair thing is the Champions League format. If you look at what is happening with the group phase and the fact that, and the application of the coefficients and so forth, you're already enclosing the money within a very, very small number of clubs.
I'll go even further than that, Philippe, frankly. I mean, if you ask most people here, like, how the Champions League money is awarded, most football fans will say, well, it's awarded based on prize money, right?
Of course not.
So but that's not the case, or rather, it's partially the case. 45%, and I think this is something which nobody talks about, but I think is an issue, and speaks to what Philippe mentioned. 45% of the Champions League revenue is awarded based on something called a market pool. What the market pool basically means is that you receive money based on what nation you're from. So if Everton reach a European semi-final and Apoel reach the exact same European semi-final with the same number of points and everything, Everton will probably get somewhere between 25 and 30 million more. Why? Because Everton play in the Premier League and Apoel play in the Cypriot League. That, I think, is a big issue.
And then
there's no getting away from that, because otherwise the big clubs are just going to say, all right, see you later, we're going off to the European Super League.
And then afterwards is taken into the equation where you finished in the league, which means like Manchester United will make more money than the club who finished fourth, for example. So all of this, isn't that really where fair play should be, put in place?
Yeah, but the problem is all the clubs and all the countries are in favor of this. I mean, there's not, in terms of that allocation of the market pool, it seems unfair to us. But the vast majority of the bigger clubs and the bigger countries back it.
Gareth, I think we might get some more Twitter action. Before I go to you, though, we're going to have one more question after this, but it's sort of any questions kind of style, question time kind of style. Can someone think of a question that requires a one-word answer or a very short answer from all of the panelists? I think you know where I'm going with that. So if anyone's got one of those, put your hand up in a second, and we'll go to Gareth first from Twitter.
I can do one of those from Twitter if you like.
Okay.
If the English national team was a band or a performing artist, who would it be?
At the moment.
Yeah, if the English national team was a band or a performing artist, Philippe, as a musical person yourself, who would it be?
Oh,
no pressure?
God, yeah, no pressure. At the moment.
You're asked to be, people are asking to be witty on the spot, Philippe.
Well, I can't be. I
Not
can't
easy
do
when
that.
you're French, but keep going. Come on.
I'm trying to think of a...
I know you are.
Yeah.
It's all right. Don't worry.
No.
I'll tell you what, we'll take a question from the floor and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
We'll come back to it. Oh, you got one straight away? Go on.
Well, I'm thinking of a band that's missing its main man. Mm-hmm. And, it could be Led Zeppelin after John Bonham died or something like that.
Okay.
It's pretty heavy stuff.
Post John Bonham, Led Zeppelin.
Post John Bonham, yeah.
Like it. Gabe, any thoughts?
Honestly, I'm just trying to think of the worst possible band I can think of.
Okay.
Worst run, worst organized, the one with Dave Bernstein and Alex Horn running it. Fill in whatever band you hate.
Okay, great.
Well, as you know, Dave, I have absolutely no knowledge of
music. You don't, I know, which is
whatsoever.
why I'm enjoying asking you.
So, what England lack is a conductor.
I was going to say, it's like the Duke Ellington Orchestra after Duke Ellington's death.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Took the words out of my mouth.
Well, at least you can all rest assured that this isn't rehearsed. There is time. Mick Hucknall sprung to mind, I don't know. Oh, just because he's shit. I don't know. Anyway, time for one final question from anyone. Yeah, you've had your hand up loads of times, so no pressure, mate, but it finishes with you. So what's your question?
This question is particularly aimed at Jonathan. During the African Cup of Nations, which was as fantastic as it was with Zambia winning, do you think that the absence of big teams like Nigeria, Cameroon, and Algeria was detrimental to the tournament, or did it make it better for it from a spectator's perspective?
I think from a spectator's perspective, it probably made it better. What was very noticeable, certainly compared to in Angola 2 years earlier, was that there were fewer teams playing with fear. That Nigeria and Cameroon particularly, I think because they're now so much poorer than they were at their peak, and Cameroon won back-to-back Cups of Nations in 2000, 2002. Nigeria in the mid-90s, although for various political reasons they couldn't quite show it, were clearly the best side in Africa. And I think because they're so much lower than then, they almost have an England situation. They go in with this burden of expectation and they play this horrible, fearful, timid football, terrified of things going wrong. And equally, teams who play them are still are afraid of a reputation. So they play defensively. They don't look at the Nigeria team or the Cameroon team as it is now. They play what in their head the Nigeria team should be, and that makes them very defensive. So you've got a lot of very, very cautious, very, very dull football in Angola. And actually, people who cover African football, you tend to see them at the Cup of Nations every 2 years. You don't see them in between. You get there and you have a month together, and it's a sort of great social group. And there were people who'd been at every tournament for 15, 16 years who were saying, I'm not going back, this is rubbish. The African game is dying. And I think actually Equatorial Guinea and Gabon breathed life back into it because the football was much freer. There was a bit of that excitement that you used to get. The fact that Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, you got to the quarterfinals, both were involved in incredibly exciting games. It was a huge positive. Zambia winning was a huge positive. And I think actually Zambia winning might be positive in terms of the whole of African football. I went to Cameroon straight after the tournament, Cameroon having not qualified, and having beaten Zambia 5-1 in 2008, having beaten them 3-2 in 2010, for them to see Zambia winning was a real slap in the face. They were really, 4 years ago, we beat them 5-1, what's gone wrong? And so finally, I think Cameroon is beginning to address the issues that have brought it down in the last 10 years. They've finally appointed a sporting director. They're finally scouting the whole country. They're finally setting up a proper scouting network. They're finally setting up coaching centres across the nation. And I think we will see, they've got to sort out the Eto'o situation, which is clearly a big problem for them. But I think in, say, 6, 7, 8 years, we'll start to see Cameroon coming good again. And I think that's as a direct result of what Zambia did. So I think it was a positive from a spectator's point of view. And while it would be a bad thing if Nigeria and Cameroon and Algeria and Egypt and South Africa continue not to qualify, if it gives them the kick they need to get their house in order, then that's a very positive thing as well.
Well, I think having been there and speaking so eloquently about the Cup of Nations, we should finish there with Jonathan, who is the expert, if you two guys don't mind, because time, I'm afraid, is against us. Thank you so much for coming. And just some housekeeping, as it were. The tours will be starting. I think they're staggered. I think that's right, isn't it? And please take your coat with you, because it involves going outside. I've been told to say this, and it's very cold. But the bar will be staying open as well, so it's up to you what you do. We have to say thank you to Club Wembley as well. We do hope it's the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship with the Blizzard, if I can be as cheesy as that, but we really do. And I'd like you to give your thanks to the panel as well, to Gabriele Marcotti, Jonathan Wilson, and Philippe Auclair. Thanks very much, guys.